Sean Oliver, kayfabe commentaries. Timeline started with the WWE as the brand that we were profiling on the series. It spun off next into ECW. Timeline ECW, naturally, we had to cover the short life of ECW, but very storied life. There would also be eventually a Timeline WCW series. But we wanted as close to a complete historical compendium as we could make of the major wrestling federations. People often ask me about TNA. I was like, well, I mean, how different would that have sounded from, 2004 to, uh, 2000 or whatever? No, it would have been 2000, like 2008 to the 2009 version to the 2011 version. Each year in WWE was very different. And certainly you had eras, right? So you have Bruno's time, and we have Superstar Billy Graham covering 78, and then in Morocco 83, cable was starting to come in, and Piper 84, the explosion of the Rock and Wrestling Connection. We're on MTV now, we're on USA Network. All different eras. How interesting would the TNA journey have been? How different would one year have been from the next? I don't know that it was ever worth it. People did ask though, and I honestly told them I just didn't see the value in it, in the way that we did WCW, WWE, and ECW. Though it was such a short life, so much happened, and it influenced so much. We could not ignore it. And the birth of Extreme Championship Wrestling happened courtesy of this man, Shane Douglas. So timeline, the history of ECW, Shane Douglas. The night that they screwed over the NWA, asked to participate in a tournament for the what was going to be the unified NWA title, which Todd Gordon and Paul Heyman felt meant nothing in 1994. So as a way to get ECW over and to maybe get even with their friend Dennis Corluzzo, who was running the tournament for the NWA, for for incidents that you will be able to read in Todd Gordon's autobiography, Todd is God, which I co-wrote with him, and we recently sold to Permuted Press. Um, they decided this would be the night that ECW would become Extreme Championship Wrestling, and they went into business in that NWA ring. What did it mean? They paid a couple of bucks to be able to use the three letters before Eastern Championship Wrestling. It had no value, um, other than a sentimental cost. But so they proposed it to Shane. Shane considered it. Shane agreed, and history was made. Shane was a great, great worker for ECW and for Todd and for Paul. Could never get that footing in WWE. One of my favorite stories from the book. I'll be happy to give you a little bit of a spoiler here. Um, he has a great run with ECW. Todd is enamored with the work that Shane's doing, cutting promos, great on the mic, great in the ring, and an innate sense of where the camera is all the time in the ring, which makes for the editing, just makes it such an easy and enviable process. So he goes to WWE. They give him the Dean Douglas gimmick. Um, and within a couple of months, Todd has to call the WWE office to use talent. I don't recall who it was, but he gets JJ Dillon on the phone, who's working in talent relations. And Todd casually says, "Hey, how's my guy Shane Douglas?" And JJ says, "You want him back?" And Todd's like, "No, no, no. I'm just asking how he's." He said, "No, really, really. You want him back? You can have him back. You want to send him back, send him down there?" I guess Shane's a bit difficult to work with. Shane's a talker. If you ask him the time, he'll tell you how to build the watch. But he's a really smart guy, and it comes out of that. So Todd never asked JJ to expand further. I don't know if it was WWE's fault of not knowing how to use him, or if Shane was driving everyone crazy. He did come up there straight from being the first Extreme Championship Wrestling world champion, so maybe there was a little bit of a puffed upness to him. I don't know, but JJ was more than happy to send him back down to Philly, and within 6 months he was out of WWE and back on ECW cameras. This is Timeline ECW with the great Shane the Franchise Douglas.
We were pretty much autonomous at that point, as far as I knew. I mean, I didn't know the exact ins and outs of the contracts or whatever between the companies. We were pretty much our own company and ran it as we wanted to. But I knew that there were certain things that we did have to lay in line with the NWA. That's why I think the Eastern Championship belt was called a heavyweight title, not the world title. And that, of course, is what led into the whole point of the tournament for the new NWA champion. They saw ECW, Eastern Championship Wrestling, as getting pretty hot at the time, and for obvious reasons thought they could use that catapult of what little bit of fame we had at that point in that area to try to, I guess, relaunch the NWA.
So you were in contact with the board or whoever was representing the NWA for the big decisions?
That, my guess would be yes. I mean, I'm not trying to be.
When I say you, I mean someone there.
Yeah, I'm sure Paul and Todd and those guys were. Todd ran everything pretty much as a businessman, so I'm sure he did. Knowing how the NWA operates, that they probably, I'm sure, had their things done their way or wanted to.
Now, you're developing the franchise gimmick around this time.
Right.
Tell me its inception and how it comes to be.
Paul gave me the idea at Valley Forge. We had a show at Valley Forge sometime shortly before that. He said he had an idea for this character, and the only direction he gave me on it is he's the captain of the football team that steals everybody's girlfriend. And I said, well, I know that guy. So, yes, that was easy enough for me. And he never fleshed out beyond that. So the character really I would say the better part of the first year, if you go back and watch closely, you'll see bits and pieces of the character changing week in and week out. There was, this, and then it was gone, and then maybe this move, and then it was gone. At one point, Paul did want me to start mimicking Flair, doing his woo and his chop. And I said, as the heat that's between us, and to where I thought in my mind, where I saw that franchise character going, the last thing in the world I could do was to look like a Ric Flair imitator. So I intentionally stayed away from that stuff as much as I could.
Talk about Sherry and working with her.
Wow, she was fantastic. I miss her because she was, when you see her in character, for those people that don't know her, she seems like such a crazy broad. She was the sweetest girl. She had a real soft side to her, was very caring about the guys. When somebody would get hurt in the dressing room, she was the first one there checking to make sure that they were okay and if there was something she could do. But a funny story about Sherry, well, a couple of them. First of all, the night that I threw the belt in Funk's face, when we were doing the promo, we did that at the Marriott at the airport, the old Marriott. And we're doing this pull apart, there's all these guys on both sides pulling apart. And I'm hooked and I can't get loose. And I'm literally fighting to try to get loose and I can't get away. And when I went back and watched the tape afterwards, it was Sherry. Sherry had me scissored. So Sherry was a lot tougher than most people realize. But the other one was when we went down, it was a match right before we did the three-way dance. And they were interjecting me into a match with Funk and Sabu. When I ran down to ringside, the timing was as soon as I got there, Sabu would planche over. So I turned my attention and I see Sabu's feet leave the mat. He gets to about here and boom, kicks me in the back of the head, I thought, and I'm down on the floor trying to shake the cobwebs loose. And I'm thinking to myself, man, I really mistimed that. I mean, that was bad. I thought had a lot more time than that. And I hear Sherry's screeching voice, "This motherfucker's got a board." This guy came up behind me, that's when we still had just ropes. Guy came up behind me like a baseball bat and just...
A fan.
Yeah, like he was swinging for a home run and caught me dead center in the back of the head. And but she was right on top of me, protecting me. You know, she would have taken the next shot if it came.
You worked a lot with funk in '94. Talk
Yeah.
about that experience.
Well, for me, it was an incredible learning experience. You know, it was the first time that, you know, up until that point in my career, prior to ECW, I was considered nothing more than a mid-card white meat babyface. Back whenever I was a kid breaking into the business, if you didn't have a wart right here and, you know, weigh 320 pounds and an ogre face, you couldn't be a heel. And so that was, you know, right around that time that it was starting to change somewhat. And when Paul put me into that role, I can't think of anybody better to have put me with than Funk. Because Funk's not a B, C, D type of coach. He's not going to say, go out and do this, this, and this, and you're going to be a great heel. You just go out and you work with Terry, and he never even tells you what you're learning, you know, but at the end of the night, you realize you've picked something up from him. And I credit Terry with the edge that the franchise character had, that, you know, that in your face, will say anything that comes to mind. That I learned from Terry, you know, and the way I learned it from him was being in the ring with him, the first couple times in the ring with him. I legitimately thought he was pissed with me because, you know, he was cussing me out and calling me a fucking pussy, and, you know, I wasn't sure if he was hot and just not liking the match, or hot at me. And after about the fourth or fifth time working with him, I realized, well, that's just his MO, that's his character, you know, and you start figuring that out. So that really was where the franchise began. You know, Terry, had I not worked with Terry Funk, I think the franchise character, whatever it would have become, would have been vastly different than the edgy character that it became. My understanding was he was on the ring crew. He was setting the ring up, and then there were a couple guys that after they'd set the ring up, they would just, you know, start doing spots in the ring, just goofing around, and you know, they'd clean the ring out and stuff as they got ready to go. And I think Paul saw that and said, "Hey, we might be able to do something with this kid." I may be wrong on that, but that was my understanding whenever I saw, you know, Mikey in the ring as a ring crew guy.
Now, at that debut, who's the one in the locker room that goes, there's someone who's going to be a heavyweight champion someday?
I don't think anybody did, probably even Paul.
Right.
You know, it was, but only in ECW could that have worked. You know,
Yeah, that was part of the special formula.
Yeah,
anything
crazy.
can happen.
That's right.
Is it true that the name Mikey Whipwreck was a rib on Dennis Whipwrecht, at that time a promoter in Maryland?
Yes. I don't know the exact story behind it, but there was a play on words with his name and a promoter. I didn't know that was what the guy's name was, but there was an inside rib to it. Big guy, you know, Al's you know, you stand next to Al, he's a physically imposing guy, 6'5", 6'6", around in there somewhere. Just a big, thick, stout guy, and you can tell can take care of himself. You know, he's got that look to him, and there were a couple times in the early days that Taz and he, you know, I think they were both trying to, you know, fight for that. You know, who's the tough guy in the dressing room routine, and you know, they would, you know, jaw jack each other, yeah, and. You know, and they would yell back and forth. I don't think it ever came to blows or to contact, but Al was just like a big teddy bear. You know, so when you'd see him go out into that ring and do the stuff that he would do, it was very limited in scope, and that was Paul's idea because obviously Al, you know, if you put him out there too long, he'd be exposed. But what he did and the way he played it for that short span of time, I think we got as much out of that as we could have. You know, he put very well at it.
Did anyone in the locker room have a problem being laid out by the chokeslam?
No, you know, that's the thing that's amazing about ECW. I'm sure along the way there was probably somebody complaining here or there. But my exposure to the dressing room, and I was there in depth pretty much, you know, from the very beginning, I never saw anybody complain. In fact, to the contrary, you know, guys like Sandman and Tommy were insisting that they get laid out, which to me was completely different than anything I'd seen in the business before that. ECW was truly from the very beginning a team concept, and not in the sense that Paul sat us down and said, okay, everybody, you guys got to get along great and be friends. It was nothing like that. It was nothing that overt. It was very organic, very true, very grassroots. That you'd go out to the ring and give your best effort, and you'd come back, and the guys that were at the monitor, and the girls, I say guys colloquially, at the monitor would stand up and give you a standing ovation when you came back. And the thing that always impressed me in ECW was, unlike other places where somebody come back and say, what the hell did you do? Go out there and work your ass off. Now I got to work harder. In ECW, it was almost like a challenge. Go out and do your best, because we're going to go out and try to top it. Paul felt very strongly that because of his history and the connection to Sabu, that that it would be a perfect idea to bring him in.
How was he towards everyone in the locker room?
Fantastic. Sheik was incredibly professional, and even like when we went, years later when we went to Sabu's wedding, he was just as gracious and professional and gentlemanly as he could have been. The funny thing about the match was we spoke, working with Terry and Sabu was always like that. We spoke very little prior to the match. It was maybe one or two things just that might necessitate a key timing point or something. But that match started off with Sabu and I going the first 15 minutes, and then Terry came down. Sabu got hurt and left for 10, 15 minutes. The match during the match, I think, prior to that, I had some semblance of an idea, but that was right around the time where I was starting to get my feel for the ring down. I could tell when a match was going well or when it wasn't. Now it's instinct to me today, but at that time, I remember the entire time thinking, this match feels like hell. It just doesn't feel right. And I think in hindsight, because it was such a different type of match, but I remember at the end of the match, whenever I roll under the rope towards the hard camera, blown sky high. It was hotter than hell in the building that night because of the people. And I'm laying there, I'm really hot, because I thought, we had a real classic opportunity to do something special here. And at that moment when I'm laying there and the crowd starts to give us a standing ovation, Sherry Martel goes, holy shit, look. And I pull my head up and I look around the building and I see them giving us a standing ovation. I thought, they're just being polite, because it just felt like a crap match to me. And not that it was a horrible match, but it just didn't feel like it gelled or it flowed. The chemistry didn't feel right at that point. But when I went back afterwards and watched it back, then I got it. I was able to take the whole panorama of the crowd involvement and Terry's genius and Sabu's athleticism and insanity, and just how it all played together, part and parcel, like the three-way sleeper, which has now become a standard in every three-way dance. That was something that just happened. That was the kind of chemistry that Sabu and Terry and I had. We could each feed off of each other just instinctively. And that's what Terry and Sabu and I had. And we formed it that night, the bond between the three of us working together. Sabu, prior to that match, had a base level mistrust of me. I don't think he thought that I was trying to get over on him. Just his business instinct was telling him, Shane's the top guy, and so he's going to try to get over on me, I think. And I found out later that part of his mistrust was because I used to call him his shoot name. It was just that was the way I was broken into the business, and I used to call him Terry. Well, that really pissed him off. He goes, I'm Sabu, and so once I realized, his mindset and everything, and then when we had that match that night, from that point forward, me and Sabu have been very good friends, best of friends in the business, and And again, I don't mean to keep sounding like patronizing, but I really do credit Funk with that, because I think if you put me and Sabu in the ring with anybody else, we could have done some pretty good stuff. But Funk, if you go back and watch that match and you understand the ebb and flow of the psychology of it, it's Funk. You know, he'll go into something and go over there with Sabu for a second and pull that story that way, and then he'd come over and showcase me for a bit. It was, you know, Terry was the one that was really working his ass off in the match psychologically.
Is it recognized beforehand that this could be a spotlight moment for the company? Does Paulie come to you and say, "This is going to be it"?
That sounds like him, but no, he didn't say that. I wasn't sure. I knew that we could have a good match. You know, it was in that building. It was starting to get to the point where, you know, you'd expect to have one or two damn good matches in that building, because it was just the magic in that building and the chemistry of that building. And in the back of my head, knowing what Sabu was capable of and what I was sure Terry would bring to the table, I knew from that standpoint there was an opportunity for it. But I never go into a match, even today or at any point in my career, that I ever think like, this one's going to be a home run. I know it's certain to be a guaranteed home run.
Talk to me about hour-long matches in general. What's the key to keeping people interested, especially at this time? Take '94, where the Broadways had really fallen out of favor in the United States. We were looking for quick shots. And so what's the key to keeping me there for 60 minutes?
I credit Paul with that, because he wanted to make sure that the franchise character, if he was going to stand up as the lead guy for this company, that he had to prove to be everything that he said he was in the promos. If I said I was the greatest and was better than Flair and blah, 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 but was going out and doing 3-4 minute matches and they were sort of half-assed or whatever, Paul realized quickly that that facade would deteriorate very fast. So he was the one that came to with the idea, you know, I want you to be the new 60-minute man. You know, I beat Funk's ear about that. I would call Steamboat and ask him his input. I would say it was probably about the third or fourth match, 60-minute match that I had, that I didn't go to the ring with my chest pounding, scared to death, because, you know, 60 minutes at that time even was a long time. You know, I mean, like you said, the 60-minute matches had fallen out of favor. You know, it was, but Paul was the one that came up with that idea. The key to it, I think, is obviously pacing yourself, but you have to also be aware, and this is one of the things that I think is missing from the business today, is in teaching, we call it monitoring and adjusting. You sit and you're paying attention. Is the crowd buying this? And if they're not, you damn well better be able to adjust on the fly and go to something else. When you have guys like Sabu that were so damn capable, and most of the people in ECW, that could go out there and do 9 million different things. For me, it was easy as a heel calling it, because I knew that anything I would pull out of my rear end, these guys were going to be able to execute. You know, and then the whole ECW style, you know, the violence that you could throw in at any point when you wanted to take a breather, or, you know, get a few minutes to get your brain back in the right place and get some more creativity flowing, you could take a walk, you know, and go out and fight in the crowd. The reason we would do that, though, is even that had a point of design to it. Was Joey Styles, as phenomenal as an announcer as he is, sitting at home watching the TV, Joey Styles could explain to you, till he's blue in the face, in however creative terms he wants, how hard we're hitting each other. But Paul knew that you sitting at home watching the monitor, and say Sabu and I are out there fighting in the crowd, that these people that are surrounding us, if you go back and watch their faces and you see their excitement, you can tell those guys must be knocking the snot out of each other, because look how the crowd, the guy's 12 inches away, he can feel it. And, you know, it was really, you know, people say that, you know, the mad genius thing on Paul, and really it's amazing to me, whether it was by luck or design, how everything fell into place there, you know, like that. Everything had a purpose.
When you guys are done with this Broadway, you go to the back. What's the reaction from everyone? Does Sheik say anything to you?
Sheik, you know, first Sheik went right up to Sabu and gave him a hug. I remember that, and I remember him coming over and shaking my hand, and then of course sat down and started talking with Terry. At that point, I still had no idea in my head. I still had the feeling that match, that we had screwed it up. I didn't wrestle that night. I went to ringside, but I was barely allowed to go to ringside because I have an irregular heartbeat. It's called atrial fibrillation. After the World Wrestling Network tapings, I would carry a letter from my cardiologist telling whoever that I had no restrictions, no physical limitations. But at that time, the commission that night wouldn't allow me to wrestle and perform because of the atrial fibrillation. So, but I remember there being a crap load of talent there, not just the ECW crew, but a lot of it. Missy Hyatt was there, and just a ton of other people, Crockett, and there was all this hype to it. I think those of us, like the ECW crew, thought that with Crockett involved and this name being thrown around, and we thought maybe that might be the vehicle that would take ECW, and really take it to the heights that it would later earn on its own. But fell apart very quickly.
What went wrong?
It just, it almost, from like now looking back, 'cause I've never been asked that question, never really assessed it. I think there was a sort of a micromanagement aspect to it. There was so much emphasis put on, we're going to go out and kick Vince's ass, and we're going to, we're going to be better than them, and we're going to top them. This is, the NWA didn't work, but this is going to be the new thing. And we're going to, the idea, especially, now in hindsight, looking at the live streaming and everything that's, stuff that's become commonplace today with the technology, at that time was in its infancy at the outset. And, had they capitalized on that and been able to bring that all to fruition, all the stuff they were talking about,
Right.
It could have been successful.
So they had all the buzzwords. They had HD, they had streaming on the internet, they had the vigor of going to kick Vince's ass. They just forgot to make a product?
Yeah, that was, I think, where it fell short. And I'm not sure Paul, you'd have to ask him this question, but knowing Paul like I know him, my guess is Paul probably didn't put his full effort. Not that he tried to, any subterfuge or, intentional undermining, but, ECW was Paul's baby, and that was his first child. And, for him, that was like any of us that are parents, how much we will do anything for our kids. Paul would literally at that point do anything for his kid in the ECW. What an incredible transformation. I mean, the surfing character was nothing happening. That was never going to work. I think Sandman realized that at that time he saw a trend. A lot of those original Eastern Championship Wrestling guys were slowly disappearing from the dressing room. And not for any malicious reason, but, when Paul would say, okay, well, Salvatore Baloney, as great a guy as he is and everything, he's not really going to help us get to that next level where Paul envisioned the company. So Sal would be sent home, and then Eddie Guerrero would be brought in. Or this wrestler goes home, and in comes a Dean Malenko, or a Chris Benoit, or, all the luchadors. I mean, just go down the list of talents. Each time bettering the dressing room to the point that I think we clearly had the best dressing room in wrestling. And I think Sandman realized that. It was either change, get on board to something that's more in line with what Heyman's envisioning. And I don't know how much of that was his idea, Paul's idea, an amalgamation of them, whatever. Sheer brilliance. Because when I first saw the character, I thought, this is dumb. The old school purist in me said, you can't let a guy drink and go to the ring like that. And, but I got to tell you, I was dead wrong. I mean, this guy, when Paul first talked about putting the belt on him, I was adamant that belt could not go there. In my head, I'm thinking, Terry Funk and, the Wrestler Classic and all that kind of stuff. And, again, I was dead wrong.
But the old school purist in you must have loved the fact that this was authentic.
Yes.
To who he was. He wasn't playing a guy who drinks and smokes.
Right, and that's what made it work.
Yeah.
In wrestling, there are very few great actors. Very few. And I'm certainly not one of them. I think the reason the franchise character works so well is because the franchise character is that side of us. You have it, everybody has it, every person watching out there has it. They want to go to work and tell their boss to kiss their fucking ass, but they can't for obvious reasons. For me, that character was just an extension of every man, but everybody else has to keep it in check. The franchise didn't. Sandman is an extension of Jim Fullington. That is Jim Fullington with all the veneer stripped away. That's him. The guy can drink like a fish and smoke more. But again, that's what made it work. And the fans, that entrance, I will say, is to me the most magnifying entrance, or the most mesmerizing entrance when he comes through that. At that time, that song had just hit from Enter Sandman, and was so big and powerful of a metal song. To see that and see him come out, the only thing that I ever saw that was bigger was Hulkamania in its prime. Granted, smaller building and stuff, but Fullington had that same kind of electricity with the crowd, with that crowd that Hogan had with the WWF fans back when Hulkamania was in its infancy.
All things being equal, yeah.
Correct.
Sure.
The Tasmaniac character was, not going to be what took Pete Sinurcha to, to any kind of heights or stardom. JT at the time, though, Paul was in love with the character. The whole singing Frank Sinatra, "Fly Me to the Moon," and Paul was really enamored with that and used to sit back. Paul very seldom would watch a segment live. He might watch it on monitor, might go to the curtain. But he would make it a point to every time JT would go to the ring that he'd be at the crow's nest or at the curtain to be able to watch him sing that live. Big ear-to-ear grin on his face and just cracking up. He really, really did enjoy JT's character. And I think because of that, he wanted to get the belt on him. The Tasmaniac character at that time was, nobody had ever heard Taz talk yet. The character was so cartoonish and so not what ECW was. I mean, it was there was no authenticity to that character whatsoever, including the bad cut job on the fur. So I think that Paul realized that and knew down the road he was going to do something differently with Pete Sinurcha, and that at that time saw more value in JT. At that point, I'd been in the business for about 11 years, I think, maybe going on 12 at that point. So I'd been around the business long enough to know that being put into that position, work or no work, it's a slap on the back from the company that they trust you in that position to draw the money, to help take that company on the ride that they expect you to draw the crowd in. So from that standpoint, it was intimidating to me to some degree, but also rewarding to know that to this, snot-nosed kid that grew up watching wrestling, getting in trouble for jumping off the couch on my brother and sisters, that, here I am standing at the, the peak of this company. The fact that it's with Funk, that he was as gracious as he was, as professional as he was, to take the time to teach me how to be the heel that I would become. When I first went to play that heel role, my mentality was, well, just do the opposite of what a babyface does, and that is so not what a great heel does. But again, I learned that from Funk, night in and night out, and by making a whole lot of mistakes. It was Funk was never one to come back and say, "God damn it, Shane, you fucked up tonight because of this or that." He would come back and say, "Well, damn, you fucked that one up," and it was just like a comment to let you know that he knew you fucked it up. And then you went on from there. It was not a lecture. There was not a browbeating that came associated to it. And again, like I said earlier, there's no doubt in my mind that you could have taken any other veteran, any Steamboat or whomever, put him in that role. The franchise character, I think, with the tools that I brought to the table, but built on the foundation that Funk had taught me in the ring, that franchise character became the character that everybody would talk about in '96, and really what I think changed the way the heels are introduced and built today. That's something I'm proud of. The fact that, like I said prior to that, you had to be a 300-pound wart-faced ogre to be a heel, and suddenly here's a guy that looks like he could be the babyface champion, and instead is so full of rage and contempt and himself that this character works, and those were things again that Funk taught. And again, not in, okay, on page 1, you got to have the attitude. On page 2, you got to be a prick. And on page 3, you got to be a tough guy. It was not that kind of learning experience with Terry. But I think part of the reason I could get what Terry was explaining or trying to explain with his in-ring work was I had been a mark for Terry for years and years and years. I mean, from back at the time that he made the movie with Stallone, I was watching the Funks, Dory and Terry both, and that whole style of wrestling. I was never, growing up, I was never the guy that was, nothing against Hulk Hogan, but that wasn't my style. I loved, the wrestler like Flair, Steamboat, Funks, and there was something about the Funks that, especially Terry, that even as a kid used to enamor me, because you'd look at this guy and say, man, he looks like he's half insane, but what a great wrestler. You could never really classify Terry. You could say, well, he's crazy, but he knows every move. He's nuts, but he can counter anything. He could talk without screaming and convince you that he meant it. There were so many facets to the Funk character, Terry Funk's character, that for me to pull from and to learn from. And I think for anybody that's as big a fan of Terry Funk as I was all those years, if they look at the franchise character, they can pull it out.
Right.
They'll say, okay, that he got that from Funk or this from Flair or whatever. But he's. I asked Terry one time, because this business can really get to you, as you know. Sometimes you get ready to strangle somebody. And one night there, I forget even what it was over, but I was so pissed off at everything. Right around this time when I was right when I was at the outset of working with Terry, I went to him. I was so pissed, I was ready to strangle somebody. And I said, God damn, Terry, how do you keep your sanity in the middle of all this bullshit? I mean, how do you keep yourself from not wanting to strangle somebody? And he said, goddamn Shane, Shane, I'll tell you, Shane, it's, he's got to be crazy. That's a Shane, you got to be crazy. You know what I'm talking about? Because goddamn, you got to be crazy. Crazy like a fox. And they went right back into character. And it was the only time, and even till today, that I've ever seen him drop the facade of Terry Funk, that crazy old cowboy routine, just for that split second. And that was another way for him to teach me, don't lose your temper like this and don't get all pissed off and ready to strangle somebody. That was his way of teaching me just one more business side of it. It was always learning experience with Terry.
Did the plastic bag get over?
It did. That was Terry's idea. The fans at the time, I was concerned with it because at that point of the match, it wasn't gimmicked. It was there was a legit plastic bag. We didn't have a gimmicks department, believe it or not. We were short on props, and he came up with that idea. And I'm thinking at that point of the match, it's so late in the match, you get winded, and by doing that, I mean, things can go bad very quickly in that kind of in this business like that, with something that crazy. So when he wanted to do it, I wasn't, but he said that's what we're going to do, and you don't tell Terry no, but it did. The fans, I remember at the end of the match, the fans, were very quiet at certain points of the building. There wasn't a real big crowd that night. It was the only time I think, to my knowledge, we wrestled in Valley Forge. And he, at that time, as the match finished, it felt like a flat finish because it was quiet. And I think looking back on it was in part because the fans that were there were concerned that, Terry might be having trouble. Terry was so damn good at selling stuff, that you weren't quite sure if when he was really hurt or when he wasn't, and I think that's part of why that finish sounded flat.
Silent heat, I think.
Silent heat, right. I think Arn was sort of perplexed by it, like, these guys are nuts. And I think Bobby saw, well, they both obviously saw it for what it was and for the value in it. But I think Bobby was a little more intimidated by it. When you see somebody out there swinging a kendo stick and chair shots and the blood and everything else, that, Bobby was a lot more in that old wrestling, from that old wrestling school, the arm drags and the drop kicks and the style of wrestling that I grew up watching. Arn, I think, as a businessman, understood it a little bit better, but I think Arn also, when he walked out, probably walked out thinking like, these kids are crazy.
Why'd they come down to him?
Well, for Paul, first of all, Paul had called in some favors, and there was at that point, I'm trying to remember exactly what it was. There was something going on between the WCW office and our company that they were providing talent to us for some reason. And looking back, again, that'd be an interesting question to find out, because I know that Bischoff hated Paul, still hates Paul, and Paul the same about him. Not really quite sure why they were. At one point, I remember they were supposed to make Austin available to us, and that's when they sent Pillman instead. And that's how Pillman got his foot in the door. So I'm not really sure what the connection was to the companies and what was going on, but there was something, because there were continued trips from WCW talent up for us.
In my notes, I have that Paulie originally wanted Austin and Pillman, but got Arn and Eaton instead.
It's possible, yeah.
Okay.
But I think that would have also been because he had known Arn and Eaton for years and worked with them. He was there like sort of the comic relief, Paul was using, I think, to try to bring some brevity in the middle. I think at that time, I remember Paul at one point saying to me, he's the comic relief in the middle of the blood and guts. That he was meant, the intention for it, I think the concept was to, in the middle of all this insanity, to have somebody do something that has that little one-liner quip or whatever. The fans, I think, didn't see it the same way. It was sort of like, Conan O'Brien in the middle of ECW, in the middle of all this this hurricane of violence. But I think that's where Paul's concept later for the franchise was that in the middle of all that violence, the champion was going to be a wrestler, and that was the way he would keep it grounded. The guy that did the Matty rule was a good guy, and he certainly wasn't his fault. As I recall from my recollections, and I may be wrong on this, week to week and point to point, but I remember more times than not, like the fans it wasn't translating to the fans what Paul was trying to get out of it. There are certain people that can pull off certain emotions and do them well to the point that they come off believable and translates with that little look. Mikey has an amazing ability to, with whatever he would call that face that he makes, go back and watch the matches when he would slide over on somebody that he clearly was supposed to lose the match in his mind. And he would give that look, and it wasn't like a planned look, it was just John Watson's face that, oh my God, this is, I wasn't supposed to win. And it translated. There was something about it on camera when you go back and you watch it, because even now as we talk about it, looking back at it, I can remember very strongly my feeling at the time was, this is making light of the belt, and it's sort of, I thought, taking the company in a direction like a little bit too much ha-ha or whatever. But then you go back and you watch those segments, and Mikey's body language, he reminded me, there was a cartoon, Warner Brothers cartoon years ago that had the two dogs, the big bulldog and little dog that ran behind him. And isn't that right? But it's my friend, it's my pal Butch, it was like the little kiss-ass dog. Mikey evoked that with his body language and with his mannerisms and his facials, and that oh shit look at the end when he won, that I think just added some dimension to the whole ECW concept. I'm sure Paul was the one that saw the whole thing with what was going on. I think it was Singapore.
Yeah, Singapore.
Where the kid egged the car and got caned for it. Paul was cognizant enough to know to bring some of that real world into the company, and a company that he was trying to portray as more realistic. So it would be stupid for us to try to be real or more real than the other companies and yet ignore the headlines and none of this happening. But I don't think Paul had any idea what that cane would come to signify in ECW and how incredibly that would play out on TV. To go back and watch that the first time, and any time it was done, when Tommy got the 10 canings and the different people would get the cane, for you fans that don't realize that cane hurt like hell. He hit me one time in the back of the head with it so hard that it wrapped. I had Tommy Dreamer in a sleeper hold, and he hit me in the back of the head this way, and the can wrapped around and smacked me and broke this knuckle. That's how hard it hit. It was not fun getting on the receiving end of that. So anytime you saw the guys, especially Tommy, taking the 10 canings like he did, and any of us that ever felt that cane after that got a newfound respect for Tommy. But in a weird sort of way up to that point, I think that I know the caning is what got Tommy over with the crowd. Up to that point, Tommy was that good-looking, almost the Jersey Shore before the Jersey Shore, that those fans were never going to buy into. But when they saw him go out there and willingly take that beating like that, and by the time he was done, his back was welted up and blood dripping down his back, that the fans walked out of there and they had their hardcore hero. Mm-hmm. It was that literally created Tommy Dreamer that night. Joey was one of the boys, he's part of the team. Joey is hands down, and this is by no means to take anything away from Gordon Soley or Jim Ross, any of the announcers from over all the years. Joey Styles is hands down the best pure announcer in wrestling. And when I say that, if you go back and you look at the differences, again, I've all the props for all those guys I mentioned, and but they had a quality that Joey didn't have. Theirs was given to them in a booking sheet. Said, okay, segment 1 is going to be this, this, and this, and this, and this is going to be the out spot and whatever else. So they pretty much knew what they were going to talk about beforehand. Joey, on the other hand, would watch the matches, and he didn't have a booking sheet, because I can tell you there was no segment that I ever had done that said, okay, when at the out of this segment, this is where we're going to be. It just didn't play that way. There were no times given. Most times, whenever I went to the ring as champion, it was after midnight. There were some times that I got out of the ring after 1 a.m. That was, again, I think part of what made ECW the lore that it was. It wasn't, okay, let's go out and do a 3, 4, 5-minute segment, and the next one's coming out. The night that I wrestled Al Snow in Georgia, with the fractured palate and my elbow still messed up, I knew I had 3 segments before my match, and the ECW doctor came and gave me some pain pills to make sure that I could get through the segment. But as the segments before mine kept dragging on longer and longer and longer, those 2 pain pills went to more and more and more, so that by the time I went to the ring, I was so doped up that you could have dropped me off the Empire State Building, I wouldn't have felt it. Again, the times were, there weren't those concentrated times to say, okay, we're going to go out and put 8 minutes in and be done. Because of that, Joey had no idea if he was going to be calling an 8-minute segment or a 60-minute segment. And to be able to go out consistently, show after show after show, in one take, and call those matches and not miss a move, not miss the name of a spot or the name of a hold, was amazing to me, to go out and see that. Again, that's not detracting from any of the other announcers, but I watched Joey Styles, Joe Bonsignore do that night in and night out, to the point where it almost made it unnecessary to do the voiceovers. The only time we had to do voiceovers in the studio, for Joey at least, was when the crowd sound drowned something out. It was almost unheard of for Joey to mess something up live that we had to retape. So he was, an integral part of the team.
When they move production back to New York, is it expressly to get him back on the team?
Absolutely, yeah. Because the other guys, when they came in as wrestling announcers, and it came off that way. If you go back and you watch those couple weeks when they're there, it's Joey's absence is huge. It's a huge void in the show. Joey had that ability to take a segment and raise it up with his "oh my God" and the cat fight screams, and there was all those little cliches that he would bring to the table that I think was every bit as important to ECW getting over and established like it did as the cane, as the blood, as the tables and the chairs and the fighting out into the audience, the promos, the girls, everything. Joey Styles was an equal member to that. You know what? I never thought of that. You're right.
Shit.
Joel Goodhart.
Yeah, how about that, huh?
That is amazing. Yeah.
What's the history there? Give me the did Paulie have a problem with Joel too, or?
Because he used to come around a good bit, so I'm assuming that it was good natured and,
Okay.
and like a chuck to the ribs. I don't believe it was like legit heat. Especially because at that point, after it had been already done with Mikey Whipwreck, I think it was just sort of like a tongue-in-cheek, gotcha. He is such a phenomenal in-ring performer. He's one of those guys. There's a handful of guys in the business. Candido was one. Benoit was one. Too Cold's clearly one. They make it look like smooth as silk. Just it's effortless to them. And you watch him. I don't want to say that he doesn't look like an athlete because he does, but he doesn't come out. You look at Benoit, the chiseled, like the Tom Billington look and all that. Too Cold doesn't come off with that look. He doesn't have the greatest gift of gab, but when he gets into the ring, it's almost like he defies gravity. Like he just sort of floats around the ring and does these things that are amazing in a different way than Sabu does it, in a different way that some of the other guys like Candido would do it. But he had such a smooth delivery of his moves in the ring that it looked smooth as silk. And there's some guys that do it that are smooth like that, but it looks like a dance. It looks almost like it's pre-planned to the umpteenth degree. And I never ever thought that with Too Cold. When I watched Too Cold, he had a legitimacy to him that came off looking like this is what, in boxing you have brawlers and you have the pugilist and you have, all the ear biters and all the rest of it. In our business, you have the mat wrestlers and you have the aerial guys. He fits into that aerial segment, but in a different vein than almost anybody else I can think of. He doesn't come across like a luchador. He comes off to me when I watch him and in my mind's eye as a wrestler that can mat wrestle but can also take to the air because he's not a small guy. When you look at him, he's not like a 5'3" guy or something. He's a pretty good sized guy, and when he used to do some of the stuff like where he would come off with like the round off kick and stuff, it was like me, gravity grabs a hold of my ass real fast and then pulls me right to the earth. He takes off. It's almost like he's got helium in his ass. He takes off and he keeps going up and up and up. It's just a strange thing to watch, but beautiful to watch. There's always been, I guess, tension between Terry and Dory, and I know that was a big concern for Paul. That were these guys gonna, my understanding of it was serious heat between the guys, and so I didn't know. Had never met Dory before that, So I wasn't sure if this was going to be something where these guys were really coming to blows, or, did they like hate each other? Or they just didn't get along. We weren't sure. I wasn't anyway, and I'm pretty sure the rest of the dressing room was the same way. What the chemistry was between these two, and Dory, I have to say, was extremely professional. To see them talking and interacting in the dressing room, they didn't seem to be any heat between them. And when they got into the ring, they certainly seemed to be working together well. But it seemed like every time that Dory came in, which wasn't that many times, but the handful of times that he did come in, then for some short modicum of time afterwards, there was this tension of, that's the last time, no more, it's not going to happen again. And then, some point later, he'd be back again. And it was just a very strange dynamic between them, as brothers. And I think there's obviously some sort of, I don't want to say like a competition between them, but, they both have pretty stellar careers, and having been second generationers like that, I'm sure there's some kind of, brotherly competition that is there, even though they probably don't want it to be. But Dory was always very professional, and never once did he ever come in and complain about, what was going on there, or the style, or he didn't want to be in that type of match. Very, very easy to work with, and very gracious.
The spot where Rocco's hung upside down from the crow's nest there, was that spontaneous? Did Paulie plan it? Is something Rocco brought up?
I'm not sure if it was spontaneous. I know that, when he was hanging there, it was like, very precarious, because the way it was wrapped around his feet, it didn't look like it was very stable.
Right.
And Johnny was not a small guy, but there's so much of that in ECW. As you're going through these questions and bringing up stuff that I hadn't thought about in years, but and I hadn't thought of this one, but as you mentioned, I remember thinking to myself as I was watching the monitor, and he slid down, like, I was like, ugh, he's gonna fall on his head. It was very, very dangerous looking. My guess is something like that Terry, Johnny, Paul, somebody mentioned it as a possibility beforehand, only because that kind of a risk take on just that'd be pretty forward, pretty outlandish to do on the spot. But like I said, in my mind's eye, I can remember watching that and thinking, like, dear God, that was scary looking.
And there's something that a Terry Funk gets away with, because he's Terry Funk. If he walks, hey Shane, what about wrap the tape around your legs and hang you upside down? If Sabu said that to you, you might tell him to go fuck himself. But it's Terry.
I might tell Terry too. That was, especially after I saw that one. That was I don't know. But there was so many nights like that in ECW that we, by the grace of whoever, we got away with it and didn't end up with anybody in a wheelchair or dead. Thank God. I always knew, even from the time we were first breaking in Dominic's school, that Mick idolized Terry and always had that that penchant to want to be the next hardcore guy, the next Terry Funk, or the next Abdul the Butcher wrapped into one, if that makes sense. Mick was never interested in going to the weight room and training and all that. Mick was interested in that whole hardcore approach to it, and had really set himself aside in Japan. And because of that, when he came into ECW, he had, there was a whole lot of spotlight put on him from the fans' perspective, because here was this guy that had, done the thing with I think it was after he had done the thing with the chainsaw, and he'd already made himself a strong reputation for putting his body on the line. Even though it preceded the dive off the cage and all that in WWF later. So when he came there, I know that the fans had that expectation that, he's going to take it to another level here, the violence to another level. And, he didn't stick around for a long time, but I think that was because, he was, clearly in his mind one of the other things. It was funny because when he came in there, I had just come back from the WWF and that whole god awful experience. And I was the guy telling him, "Man, you want to think twice about this one because that was clearly the worst 6.5, 7 months of my entire 30-year career." And I didn't want to see him as a friend of mine go through the same thing. I think Mick fit in there better because he's a lot more easygoing personality to fit in there. But when he came to ECW, he clearly had the intention of bringing that hardcore style with him. But I think once he got there, I don't know if it was either Vince telling him, keep it under wraps or whatever till you get up here. He did those few things, the chair shots and that kind of stuff when he was handcuffed by Mikey, but he never really, in my mind, blossomed into that what he became later as Mankind. Just the dive off the cage and all that crazy stuff that he'd later doing and set himself apart for. But he also had his kids there. I think he was, in hindsight, just using, he was getting the experience of ECW, nice paycheck, getting ready to go into WWF, and trying to walk that line of how much can I give the fans and satiate their appetite, but not give away the whole store. I think if this is the right time frame, they were involved in some. He was involved in some illegal activity, or was accused of being involved in some illegal activity, and there was, some really pointed heat around town that. Without, I don't want to get into the nuts and bolts because I don't even know all of them, but I do know that there was some bad people involved. A lot of pressure from the authorities, and I think at that point Paul just felt it was better. And I don't know if it was he left on his own, or he was fired, or Todd told him to go home, or whatever. I don't know what the parameters were of that, but I know at the time there was a lot of heat going on around town for some stuff that gets people killed for.
Was he told to do this, or is this something he just wanted to do?
My guess is, and it's a guess, but when he left WCW, he was fed up. That he was not allowed to do the things that he could do and be the talent that he could be. Clearly, he ran headlong into the politics of WCW. He had spent the previous 2 years in Memphis, and I'm sure played some part of the politics game. But in WCW, they had established that politicking down there as a science and an art form, and he had run headlong into it. Wasn't allowed to do his diving elbow off the apron, and was reprimanded for certain things. And I think that was his sort of commentary to screw you guys.
Gotcha.
I got a lot more potential. I'm going to prove it to you.
Now, word has it that an old friend of yours with bleached blonde hair was particularly upset by this and made it known to anyone that would listen in WCW.
I do remember that, as you say it, that it came. But again, that's just typical Dick, And I'm not talking.
Did you say Rick or Dick?
No, I said Dick.
Oh, you said Dick.
Yeah,
I
meant to say Dick. It's so apropos and it fits so well.
You guys haven't hugged and kissed yet? All these years. All these years. Brothers in the same fraternity, really.
We are. Yeah, but cut from very different cloths. I've never expected anybody to kiss my ass in this business, fans or wrestler or promoter. But Rick seems to have this penchant that he has the right to get up and make a demand for a draw at 3 o'clock in the morning, and that somehow it should miraculously have the ATM machine appear in front of him, and how dare it not? It's Dick Flair, the classic meltdown.
But your interactions in person,
yeah,
he's usually very respectful of you to your face. He fears you a bit.
Well, he's Rick he can turn the charm on when he has to. He and I've mentioned this many times, but Ric Flair is one of the reasons I got into the business. He was the type of guy that, as a kid sitting at home watching, and I mean a small kid, Dick, he was the guy that I used to watch on television or read about in the magazine and say, "Damn, that guy is what a wrestler is supposed to be." And then meeting him later in person and realizing that he was, we all have skeletons in our closet and we all fall far short of the bar that we set in our own mind. But this guy fell so quantumly short of being anything even close to what I had in my head for him.
How long did it take you to realize that after meeting him?
I would say probably within the first 3-4 months, and only because, the way I was trained to come into the business, I was told, keep your mouth shut, your eyes and ears open, pay attention. So the guy that I was paying attention to was him, because that was the guy that I had hoped to be like one day. And when I see him pulling his penis out in a bar full of kids, running up and down a hallway like some fraternity boy at 46 years old, the world heavyweight champion, that represents a company, I felt, even as a kid then that didn't know what the hell I was doing one way or the other, I knew I didn't want anybody looking at him doing those type of idiotic, absurd, obscene things, looking at me and thinking, well, he's a wrestler and that guy over there's a wrestler, so do you do that too? No, I don't pull my penis out in a bar full of kids. I don't run up and down a hall at 46, 7 years old naked and stomping on doors and going up to women I don't even know and dragging them into the middle of a dance floor and, making a fool of myself. These were the things that I saw him doing, and it was embarrassing to me.
Was he disrespectful to other wrestlers?
Rick was disrespectful in covert ways that he wouldn't even realize, just because he had had so many people, kissing his rear end for so long and blowing smoke up his backside that he didn't even realize when he was being disrespectful to people, I think, a lot of the times. But other times he clearly did. And I think he relished in that, and I think that's part of the reason, my own commentary, I think that's part of the reason why, we're hearing these stories about him today. To me, in my mind, at this stage of his career, Ric Flair should be, the elder statesman of our business, not being talked about in the stories that we're hearing about, whether they're twisted or not. There's some semblance of truth, whatever the semblance of truth is, and the nugget of, and the grain of truth at the center. For anybody 60 years old to be acting like that is, as a representative of the company, the only question I have is to Dixie Carter and anybody else that's in a position of authority at TNA is, why would they allow it to go on, and why would they not leave him there and fire him, not leave him there and then bring him back a couple of days later and then he's back on TV.
Has he finally, has he come unglued completely? Has he unraveled?
The stories that I'm hearing from different people, I've not seen it because I've not been around. I work, my own schedule and want it that way. But I'm hearing stories from several people, about him making demands to Dixie about him not being happy with his suite at the DoubleTree, about the thing with the payoff, and it's just, to me, it's sad. Again, my personal differences aside, that this guy, who was the embodiment of professional wrestling for so many years, has become, this sort of sidekick, butt of the joke, and it's sad. I would hope for him. We've seen so many deaths in this business and so many, train wrecks that, I don't wish that for anybody or on anybody. I would like to see that, whatever it is that Rick feels that he needs to, I don't know if he's covering something up or trying to conceal something or compensate for something else. To me, I would much rather see the Ric Flair yardstick champion. That was the measuring stick to everybody, as an icon at that point, as opposed to this guy that everybody's scratching their head and going, did you hear this Ric Flair story? Did you hear that Ric Flair story?
Why was Snuka a heel, you think, in the first place here?
I think that in that arena at that point, with what he was going to be able to do, that he'd probably fit in better as a heel. In front of that crowd, you know, other than just the dive off the top, that those fans would have responded to, I think clearly it would have been easier for him to get over as a heel as opposed to as a babyface. And working with those guys, you know, obviously that would have been the logical step for him.
He's gone from the company shortly thereafter. Is this kind of a Sal Balomo thing where Paulie's seeing that we need to look at and act a certain way, and this is
Right.
probably not how it's going to...
Well, I think also that it was, in a way, Paul's homage to, you know, we're going to get guys like this, these legends that come through here, and not, I don't want to say it because it sounds like condescending and almost rude to say, well, we're going to get these guys in and help them elevate our guys. But clearly Jimmy Snuka is universally known in wrestling and could give the rub to somebody else by coming in there for that quick in and out like that, as opposed to coming in and being exposed, you know, on a 6-month run or whatever, where he clearly in that style, especially then when, you know, these guys were doing all this crazy stuff, would have been like a magnifying glass.
You know if any of the 4 combatants are trepidatious about going in?
I know Johnny was, and I'm pretty sure Teddy was as well. You know, I don't recall the mindset beforehand, like with Dory. I remember like that kind of match. And I forget, you know, again, in my specifically can't remember which one was which, but I know that in general it seemed to me that Dory felt less comfortable with that kind of stuff, more comfortable with, you know, the wrestling moves and counters. And there, you know, there was, I think it was one of those matches with the Public Enemy, probably that one where Terry had gotten so twisted up in the barbed wire. Was it this match? That he was so twisted up in the barbed wire that he had to be cut out of the barbed wire at the end.
This is actually the one where Terry calls for the fans to throw the chairs.
Ah, okay, yeah. So that wasn't. It was later when he had to be cut out. But yeah, when he did that, the veteran in me was watching that and thinking, oh my God, you know, if one errant chair goes too far, hits the rope and bounces back. I mean, that was the type of stuff that we got away with, not completely, obviously, with the fire incident that I'm sure you want to talk about, but they, you know, those type of incidents that were literally one bad bounce of a chair off a rope, whatever, away from closing the company. There was, you know, and there were scores of those that we got away with over the years, by the grace of whoever, you know, that we were just very fortunate that we didn't have, you know, a lot of fans that were ready to sue the pants off us. I don't think in today's environment, with as litigious as society is, that we could have gotten away with anywhere near what we did then.
Why did Todd and Paul run a show in Dennistown after abiding by the agreement for so many years that they would separate? Is this the beginning of the breakdown in the relationship? Is this a signal? Should we interpret it that way, or was it just a new market that...
My guess is probably simple as a new market. You know, I remember that we were in Wildwood one time, and it drew abysmally. I mean, it was a very thin house, and so I think for that reason is why we didn't go back. But I know at that time it was critically important for us to get the guys as much work as we could. At this point, the company's beginning to press on the boundaries of Philadelphia and, you know, Delaware, these few places that we had tried to run shows and had run shows. I know the impetus, business-wise, was to grow the company but to do so in a way that didn't necessitate airfares and rental cars and everything else. So Wildwood was a logical, at least on paper, a logical choice for us to go. It was driving distance, seemingly party town. It would have been perfectly ripe for ECW, but it did very poorly. I remember.
Yeah, 200 was the house, and the August 12th show was summarily canceled, I guess, because of that house. But now, despite the agreement for Todd to stay in Philly and Dennis in Jersey, Dennis had tried some skullduggery in the past, calling the police in Philly for overcrowding and sprinkler system stuff. And
again, who drew blood first, I have no idea, but I do remember a lot of nights we'd go out and there were the stuff you're talking about, but there were also flyers on the cars outside of our building for Corluzzo shows. So, and I remember at the time thinking, Taz and I used to talk about it quite, at length, about how absurd it was. These two guys, like they're fighting over, like they're fighting like WCW and WWF, and at that point they literally were, two very small companies. And even though ECW would go on to be something much bigger, but I do recall, I'm sure Todd took his shots back, but Dennis was far from the innocent little cherub and the whole thing. He was certainly involved in, like you said, the skullduggery as well. So it went both ways.
Talk to me about working with Jimmy Snuka physically.
For me, Jimmy, again, is one of those guys. As a kid, I can still remember seeing that dive off the cage. The same thing as me throwing the NWA title down. I think that's what, not to say that encapsulates his entire career, but to me, when I think of Jimmy Snuka, that was like the wow factor. Like, holy shit, that's impressive. So to be in the ring with him later, working with him, it was great. Much different scenario than with Funk. Jimmy is was physically very gifted, but was not the ring general that could communicate the same way that, say, a Funk could or a Steamboat could. So it was much different working with him in that sense. For me, it was difficult because I got more and it's nothing that Jimmy said or did, it was probably more in my mind, but that, like, his expectation was that he was Jimmy Snuka and, from here, and again, not that he came out and said anything or acted that way or whatever, but in my head, that's the way it was coming across and feeling. So it was much harder for me to work with that, and then also realizing that you couldn't do the things, Jimmy and very few people of Terry's generation were going to be very willing, like Terry was, to take, chair shot or, thrown around, or, when Terry wanted you to lay your punches in and he meant lay him in. Most of those guys of that generation were not going to be so accommodating to that. So,
could you do that with Jimmy?
Yeah, Jimmy never complained in working with him, but I think, again, in my head, I wanted to be careful not to do that, not have that same level of intensity and stiffness working with him, and then, him thinking that I was disrespecting him or whatever. He clearly, when he came there to work, the few times that he did, you could sense that he felt like this was the business he remembered, and it clearly wasn't. So I think that's why in some ways it seemed like two trains passing in the night. His expectation of what he remembered the business being and what we had made the ECW be at that time were very different things.
Do you remember Paulie's reaction in the back as this is happening? Is he freaking out?
Yes. Yeah, if Paul's going to sit there and tell you he thought that was the greatest thing ever, he was shitting bricks in the back. We all were, because, again, like I said, if one of those chairs would have hit the rope and snapped back and hit a kid in the front row or whatever, I mean, that would have literally been the end of the company. And I remember Paul was on the edge of, he was very, very concerned. But we all were in the back, all of us watching it. And then after it got to the certain point where the fans were, you could see the fans were slowing down and the chairs were in this big, pile of these chairs and these bodies underneath it. You thought, and that's only in ECW could that happen, because my God, what an amazing visual on the camera. You go back and you look at the footage of that. But again, at the time that it was going on, I remember thinking, like, dear God, this.
And Terry standing in the midst of it.
Yeah, and if you watch a couple come very close to his head, I thought, now if I did that, every chair would go bang, bang, bang. 200 chairs would hit me right in the head if I called for him. So
does anyone reprimand him in the back, or is he kind of untouchable and beyond being yelled at?
Terry reprimanded himself. He would come back and say, "God damn it, Paula, I'm so sorry. Me, I'm a fucking idiot. And I got a little too into it out there, But no, Paul never reprimanded him, and he never ever meant ill. Terry never went to the ring and thought, you know what, screw it, I'm just gonna do what I want out here and screw the company. He never went into business for himself that way.
Fan participation becomes very important from a weapon standpoint years later, as fans are bringing things to the matches to hand to wrestlers. Is anyone discussing the risk involved as this is happening?
Vagaries, it was most of the stuff that the fans were bringing. First of all, our security did a bang-up job, amazing job at keeping that under control, because a fan could have very easily slipped if our security wasn't doing the job that they had to do. Could have very easily slipped something very dangerous into the building, and somebody been very badly hurt. But for the most part, those guys would. When we used to run in Pittsburgh, I know we had to have 2 dumpsters outside the front door, because the fans would try to bring stuff in that was, we had people bringing fire hydrants, just you name it, and it was there at some point. Somebody brought it. In the Pittsburgh show, one time somebody brought a car door, which we actually let into the building. And Cronus and Perry Saturn were in a match with the Dudleys, and halfway through the match, only Cronus could do the spot and make it work. Gets the car door, rolls the window down, and he stands next to the door with his hand out there like he's driving down the road, and it worked because it was Cronus. Another time in that same match, I believe, somebody had brought in a full sheet of glass from a storm door. Now, storm door glass is can cut the hell out of you, because it's made to not break into shards. It's meant to shatter, so that you don't get those big jagged pieces of it. And I think it was the Dudleys hit Perry right over the head with it, and it was literally almost a case of death by 1,000 cuts. It looked like somebody had taken a razor blade and just like went up and down his front and back and his head and his arms and everything. It looked fake. There's so many cuts on his body.
Who allowed that in?
My guess is it slipped past security, thinking that it was plexiglass or whatever. Right. But it's in hindsight, I give props to our security that they did the job they did, because with in Pittsburgh's case, we'd have 5,000 fans sometimes at that building, and for maybe 10 or 12 or 13 guys to police 5,000 people is saying something. And the other thing with our security is, as we would fight into the crowd, especially like when I would go out into the crowd with the heat that I had built there and that Paul had put on the character, they were amazing at keeping that chaos in a controlled environment, keeping the fans far enough back that there wasn't an errant elbow caught by a fan as we were throwing punches, but also making sure that fans weren't getting knocked down, trampled, to make sure that we weren't being attacked. And there were a couple times. One night working with Tommy Dreamer in the arena, Tommy had taken a bump over the railing into the crowd. I stepped on the bottom rung, and as I went to reach over to pick him up, I saw a guy pick a chair up, and in my head I'm thinking, he's sure as hell not gonna, bam, and he smacked me right between the eyes. Well, at that point I went right over the railing and just started beating the hell out of the guy, and Tommy climbed up the guy and covered him to protect him. And as I back away, like in my head backing my way, because the crowd's here now, I want to get back away and get back inside the railing, I can see something out of the corner of my eye. It was like in slow motion. I turn and I look, and this glass bottle hits me right in the lip. Bam! Smacks me in the lip. And of course, at that point where my temper was and my mentality, I look and about 300 hands all pointed this one guy out. And let's just say that guy got taken to the extreme that night without incriminating myself on camera. Somebody got extreme on his ass. And
Probably another fan of yours.
probably so, yeah. It was some overzealous fan that protected me. But so for that type of stuff to have happened, it did happen, that it could have blown up much worse than it did, and never really got out of hand, except with the one incident, the unfortunate incident with the fire. We were extraordinarily lucky and fortunate that we didn't get a lot more lawsuits and a lot more problems before we did, because again, any one case out of hand would have closed the company like that. The original idea was to use the tournament to, in one way or another, catapult ECW and the NWA to bigger things. That slowly, or quickly in Paul's mind, I'm sure, transformed into to be more self-serving and more focused on our side of the fence. But again, I can sit here and talk ad nauseum at the things that Paul, I think, did wrong, and we all did wrong in ECW. But in this case, Paul deserves the props because the NWA at that point was a dead entity. That wasn't our doing. That was their own doing. The NWA was done, gone. And the only reason it was still breathing any air at all at that point was because of a few marks around the country were paying a shitload of money to the NWA board to keep the name alive. It wasn't drawing any noteworthy houses any place, a couple hundred here, a couple hundred there. There was no NWA glory days. Its glory days were clearly behind it. So at that point, just from a business standpoint, I think Paul and Todd would have had to make the decision, do we try to, at this point, while our sails were being set, our ship had left the port and we were on to the sailing part of it, the NWA was still sunk at the bottom of the harbor. Do we take the energies that we spent, the better part of this last year, building into what we've created at that point, trying to resurrect something that's clearly dead? Or do we figure out a creative way to become the bad boys, in wrestling, to be the guys that will always swerve even the smartest marks, and to be a little bit self-serving, to be a little bit egocentric. What was the best thing we could do? Even on paper, clearly that equation works out to even Corluzzo, if he would have been honest with himself, would have said, we got to go with ECW, because the ECW at that point was getting notoriety. We were getting press. Fans were talking about us. Once, if you write a balance sheet, one side of that equation had some gusto to it. The other one was flat and dead. So from that point, it was a very simple decision for Paul to make and Todd to make. But when Paul had called to offer me up the idea, like I said earlier, he had told me, he didn't want to tell me what to do, but he said, here's the two options we have. If we go with the NWA, you would tour with the NWA so many days out of the month, paid by them, and then you would come back to us, sort of like Flair used to do with the old NWA. The difference being there would be no reunion arenas with 10, 20,000 people in them at that NWA. Or do we take this opportunity to see if we can make something a little bit bigger and a little bit more grandiose for ECW. And
does he tell you what that involves you doing in the ring?
At that point?
Right, when he first floats it by you.
No, just floats the concept.
Okay.
And then at the end of that conversation, after we had talked about the concept itself, he said, that's when we got down to the brass tacks and the nuts and bolts of actually taking the belt and throwing it down. And when he told it to me, I can still vividly remember I was sitting at my kitchen table and I smiled because I thought it is so purely ECW. At that point, we'd already pretty much personified what the philosophy of the company was. And I thought, boy, if there ever was a time that, if this was 300 years ago, we'd all have one eye patch on and, saying "arg." It was pure ECW. It was clearly what we were meant to do. My first instinct was, man, I love the idea. But then when he started saying, look, Steamboat, Dory Funk, Terry Funk, starts going down this list of names, the Briscoes, Harley Race, guys that I had, and many of them, hugely admired, and some that I didn't, but still looked up to as talents, like Flair and Dusty, and there were no matter what I felt about personally anybody in that company, and everybody in the NWA that had held that belt had held a piece of history. And so now I'm sitting in my house thinking, like, oof, I don't know what Steamboat will say. I don't know what Funk's liable to go crazy. I don't want to disrespect Harley. I don't want to disrespect any of those guys. But when it got to the point of sitting down and again, in my mind, saying, okay, here's the debit and credit sheet, the NWA, and every way I sliced it and every which way I looked at it, that the company that Harley held the belt for, and Dusty and Flair and the Funk, that company was already dead and gone. So in my mind, I wasn't doing anything to their heritage or to their lineage or their props in the business. It was clearly us doing what ECW would later become, and even at that point, we were the bad boys. We were the guys that nobody could control. Somebody coined the phrase, the island of misfit toys. We fit in nowhere else, and here's the place that we do fit in. So I threw my lot with ECW. Earlier the week, Paul Heyman called late one night and said he had an idea. He wanted to run it by me. And to be fair to Paul, Paul never dictated to me, or I don't know about anybody else, but he never came to me and said, here's what I want you to do, this or that. But with the NWA belt situation, he said, I have an idea at the tournament. They want you over as the champion, the NWA champion. And what if we did this? But very quickly after he laid that down to me, he said, now you understand, if you do this, here's the pros and cons. So to be fair to Paul, he never came down on one side and said, I want you to do it or not want you to do it. He told me the idea, told me the good sides of it, the bad sides of it, the good sides over here, the bad sides of it, and never called me again that week. It wasn't like he was bugging me and said, have you come up with your idea or decision yet? In fact, I didn't make my decision until right at the end of the match with Scorpio. I had known early in the day I was probably going to lean that way because, obviously ECW was my bread and butter. But Dennis Corluzzo when I got to the building that day, kept coming up to me and handing me this contract, of which I obviously couldn't sign at the time because if I was going to do something later in the night. So I kept asking him to politely, Dennis, I don't have time to read this. I never signed a contract till my attorney reads, which is true. And I was no way going to sign any contract without my attorney reading it first. And I certainly couldn't sign that one until the end of the night if I was going to ever sign it. And literally all day long, he followed me around like a dingleberry. He was waiting for me outside the bathroom. I was walking out of the bathroom once, and I said, Dennis, please, And that was what got me started thinking about just seeing how obscene this guy was being with this. And also, I should add in there, a few weeks before that, he was on Mike Tenay's show, maybe a week or two before. He was on Mike Tenay's national radio show. Tenay called me up the next day and said, did you hear my show last night? I said, no. He said, we need to go back and listen to the archive. And I did, and in it, Corluzzo just buried me, saying that, now at this time, we were making maybe 1 or 2 shots a month with ECW, so we're still very reliant on independence for our bread and butter. And Corluzzo was telling people to not book me. That I had a bad reputation of no-showing. In my knowledge, at the top of my head, I don't believe I ever no-showed any show that I didn't previously tell the person that I wouldn't be there.
This in an effort to block any options for you other than him?
I'm guessing, yeah,
Okay.
Probably so. So
Wow.
It was, on all levels, it was so unprofessional on his side of it towards me at a time when I was still feeding my family from the vast majority of those shows. And then that day with the contract was, just pushed me further to the edge. And but then at the end of that match, right as I'm getting ready to do the promo, I look over, and he had a look on his face that was, how do I say, I don't want to say condescending, but almost like he didn't like this outcome, but he had to take it because he knew he needed ECW. He just had a look on his face like he wasn't happy with me winning that belt, and I don't know if it had to do with me not signing the contract earlier or whatever. And he wouldn't even look at me. Todd Gordon was sitting right next to him, and I think Joey was at the end of the table at ringside. And Todd and Joey were looking right at me, and Corluzzo was looking straight ahead, and he had that look on his face. And that's when as I started going through the promo, as I'm doing the promo, I still don't know, exactly. I knew I was probably going to go that way, probably from early in the week. But it wasn't until I went down through the list of names and the fans kept shouting out different names, and then I saw Corluzzo's face, and then I said, "Oh, and they can all kiss my ass." The best part was Corluzzo was totally flummoxed at that. He didn't know what to make. He had just had the biggest rib in wrestling of the year, pulled on of that year, and probably of many years. And he was at ringside when I threw the belt down at him. I saw Todd trying to assuage him, and what Todd was saying, I have no idea. But when we get back to the dressing room, I'm thinking I'm going to have to either goozle this guy to get him away from me or whatever. And he comes back into the dressing room and goes, "Shane Douglas, I don't give a damn. You are going to defend that belt." And a few minutes after that, Paul's talking to him and actually has him shooting a promo.
I was going to ask you this.
Yeah. Yeah.
Which made us wonder if this was all a work from his standpoint, because he stays there.
Yeah. He was pissed off, screaming and yelling in the back, and that's when he's telling me if he has to go to court, he's going to make me defend that belt, blah, blah, blah. Paul goes and talks to him, and as he's talking to him, I see him right away sending for the camera. I'm thinking, this can't be possible. This guy couldn't possibly be this stupid. And when I saw him against that door doing that promo, I thought, man, this is where do you get to piss down somebody's leg, pull the biggest rib on them of their entire career in that business, and then have them make a fool of themselves on your camera? It was, but all those things together. I mean, people say, well, when I threw the belt down, it established ECW. ECW was already established before that. That was just like the exclamation point at the end of the sentence. And then when you have him doing that promo afterwards was just so incredibly genius on Paul's part that I would have never even thought of sending for a camera, thinking this guy's going to spit in my face if I say it or whatever. So, just all those pieces fit together so perfectly, that, here's this big rib played, gets over huge in the building. The tournament was a huge success. The matches were all very good and performed what we wanted them for. And then we get that incredible promo at the end. And then after all that, a guy cutting a promo on himself is sheer beauty.
Do you know if they were ever able to bury the hatchet before Dennis died?
I don't think so. I don't know for certain, but I know that I do recall when he passed away suddenly that Paul and Todd were pretty shaken up by it. And I remember, there was just sort of like a feeling of, shame on us. I felt, not that I felt bad about doing it. It just, in the overall scheme of things, in my mind, I always figured that people would, especially in the business, would qualify it and quantify it as, hey, it was a wrestling angle. I would have probably done the same thing, whatever. But because I never had a chance to really talk to him and tell him, hey, guy, was what it was. Sorry it had to be or whatever. I know I felt bad about it. I do know that Todd and Paul felt really bad about it when we got the word.
The Flair is dead chance start. This is you're doing your promo now. Is it true that if WCW or Flair acknowledged this, Todd was prepared to book the Spectrum for a 60-minute Broadway for you and Rick?
Yeah, I will confirm something here that I was holding in check for my book. There was at a point, one of the reasons that Arn and Paul were keeping a close connection was at this time, this is when Flair was having a ton of trouble with Bischoff. And Arn had contacted Paul to ask him if he was legitimate and serious about wanting to do the match, and if he did do the match, could he keep me under control? And you know, I don't know where I got this reputation in business of being some kind of an out of control guy, but I think it was more Arn making a call for Flair to find out if we would do business. And so Paul started the discussions with Arn, and I told Paul to give my answer to can he keep me in line. Proposed, Flair wanted, I think it was 120 or 150,000 guaranteed. We couldn't do that. We couldn't make that kind of a guarantee up front. So what I told Paul to do in response to his request for a guarantee is tell him that we'll do, and to answer the question about whether I'm under control or not, propose a 3-match series. The first match in Charlotte. It goes 59 minutes, 55 minutes, whatever. He beats me. Second match in Pittsburgh, same thing, I beat him. Third match goes to Philadelphia. We do pay-per-view from the Spectrum for the third match. And at whatever point, I go over on him. And, it was at that, right after that is when, at least from what Paul had told me, was that he was very interested. And then within a short amount of time, it was like within like 2 or 3 days, it went from, it looked like it was going to happen. It's going to happen. He re-signed with WCW. It was very, it was like a long 2-3 week drawn out process of back and forth. And then here it is. He's agreeing to it. It's almost done. It's almost a done deal. And then like literally 24 hours later, the whole thing was pulled away. And it was at that point that I told Paul, I will not mention Flair anymore in promos. Because at that point, now when we knew definitively he was never coming, it looked, almost made me look silly, to keep on talking about this old has-been, my words, that was never going to be in ECW. Now, just as a backstory to the whole reason the Flair is dead and all that chant started, the reason I started burying Flair in the first place on the microphone, aside from the stories I've now talked about ad nauseum with Flair disrespecting me and giving me bad feedback and sort of punking me out when I was a kid who had idolized him. The reason I started burying Flair on the microphone in Philadelphia was because other than Charlotte, I would say Charlotte, Chicago, and hairbreadth behind that, Philadelphia, were Flair's most over towns. Flair was a god in those 3 towns, could walk on water to the fans. So my thinking was, as a heel at that early stage, Paul had us go, started us off as heels, and then we went through like a 6, 7, 8 month period where we were all tweeners. And when I was in that tweener position, Paul was wanting me to pull ahead of the pack and go back to being that stone cold heel. And in order to do that, to get that response from the crowd, it's hard to get the crowd to respond for you when you're the guy that threw the NWA belt down and created Extreme Championship Wrestling, supposedly, and was the guy that was challenging Hogan and Flair and Michaels and Hart to shoots, and they weren't responding. So I was the poster child for these guys. So what do I do then to get these fans who I'm representing to turn on me? And I figured if I go out and start burying on Flair, that'll get heat on me because they love Flair. So whenever I'm hearing that Flair is dead chants and the signs being held up, I was more perplexed than anybody at it. That was not the response I was looking for.
Interesting.
So
it was actually a failed ploy.
Yeah, it didn't work out the way I wanted it to, but it was very gratifying though.
Who's the first person that comes up to you in the locker room?
Paul. Paul was waiting at the curtain, but everybody in the dressing room was giving a standing ovation. Scorpio was right next to Paul, was very gracious, and I thanked him. And within short seconds, is when Todd brought Corluzzo back, and Joey was leading the charge. It was Joey first to the curtain, and then Todd and Dennis behind him. And Dennis, Todd was like, I could still see, still explaining things to Dennis, and Joey looked and like gave me that look like, brother, you won't believe this, And but it was very rewarding in that sense because, like I had mentioned before publicly, that my dad had always, when you're a kid growing up and your dad says stuff to you like, hey, you can always walk with your feet on the ground, you can soar with the eagles. Well, what in the hell does that mean to a 10-year-old kid? I had no idea. For the first time in my life, I understood what my dad was talking about. This is your chance to, you can just go through life and meander through life and get by like everybody else does. Or you can take the chance at trying to be something more. And that was the opportunity for me to make ECW something more, to throw my lot with them and to take that chance. And luckily it worked out for us. But so when I make the comment, when I look up and I felt my dad had died August the previous year, right within a year before that, had never seen his son become the World Heavyweight Champion. He'd seen me become tag team champion. And no matter how much I tried to smarten my dad up to the business, he didn't want to be smartened up. The night that Steamboat and I won the World Tag Team belts, it was on a Clash of Champions. I called him. We had about 90 seconds before a segment where Wyndham would lay us out. So I ran over the phone, called Dad, and he was crying because his son had won the World Tag Team title. So for me to have won the belt that he would have recognized, the NWA belt, that night, and it just, for some reason, I felt my dad there. That this is what he'd been trying to teach me his whole life. The whole time I was growing up, and I never got it and understood it until that night. And it all sort of just encapsulated and then brought all that angle together.
Did you think about him when you were?
Absolutely.
What was his name?
George.
Did you think about George in the ring right there?
Not in matches, I didn't.
No, that
yeah,
night.
As I was cutting the promo, that's why I stopped and looked. I was, here we go, Dad, because it wasn't a corny line that I had pre-planned out earlier in the week or whatever. It was just, I felt my dad watching that night, that he was sitting there, because my dad was somebody who, he never understood why I used a pseudonym. I tried to explain to him, and he never got it. He thought I was embarrassed of my name or whatever, and he never liked the fact that I was the bad guy. Those were things but I could see him sitting up there like going, that's my boy, the World Heavyweight Champion right there that just dissed Flair and all these other guys, that he was, proud of that. My guess would be that Paul or Todd, out of respect, probably said to him, I doubt they would have said to him what may happen, but they probably said it to him in some terms. And again, this is just a guess. You may not want to be there that night because something may happen that you won't like, or you may disagree with, or whatever. And I thinking that there's also, out of respect for me, from Paul and Todd, thinking like, this could turn bad fast. If Shane had to start, Funk started coming at him with his fist flying or whatever. Not that we would expected that from him, but I think it was just for all the right reasons. That it was probably the smarter thing to do to, what's the saying? Discretion is the better part of valor.
Yeah.
Better to be respectful to Funk and his connection to that than run the risk of something stupid going on that he didn't need to be there for.
Funk ever mention the promo to you subsequently?
Never.
Interesting.
None of them ever have. I've Dusty's, and I've spoken to Dusty a million times. Steamboat, Dory and Terry, the Briscoes, even Harley. I saw Harley here just a couple months ago at the convention in California. Nobody from that side has ever said anything to me about it. I think they all clearly realize, it was an angle that was designed to help the company that I worked for, no different than they did trying to help the NWA belt when they were doing it.
Would would you agree this match made Tommy with the fans?
Absolutely. He up to that point, he would, he was, trying to think of like, do I follow the Bruno Sammartino, go out and just be the proud Italian kid, or, he's going to the ring wearing those silly suspenders, and all the parts of the equation were wrong for Tommy. He's a good-looking kid, was built well at that time, wrestled a very clean style, and all of a sudden here comes this beating thing that fans in the building, some of them literally were turning away from. By the seventh, eighth saw, they're like, "Jesus, this is, pretty barbaric," and clearly established Tommy as being something more than just a pretty boy.
Is this the first time Paulie's got to make some travel arrangement, some flights for you guys?
Probably so. And
anyone get screwed up?
I believe that this is the one where Ron Simmons traveled as an old Hasidic Jewish guy. It was some like ridiculously ultra Orthodox Jewish name. And, Ron Simmons, when he got there, said, "Do you believe that?" Ron had that deep power. "You believe that? You believe that shit? Just pissed off that Paul would, do that. Whether he was stealing somebody's miles or what, who knows? But it was he had. I don't recall him ever flying me under anything other than my name, but I know there were a lot of guys that flew under names that.
But isn't it so funny the power he has over you? To lean to a Ron Simmons and go, "You're going to be Shecky Goldblatt today. Yeah. Don't worry about it. You'll be fine."
Yeah.
Nobody asks.
Yeah. Well, I don't know if nobody asked. I mean, we figured it probably wouldn't matter if we did ask.
You wouldn't get an answer. Yeah. Did you guys like working Florida?
We did. I remember there was an outdoor building that we wrestled at there, and it had poured like a torrential downpour earlier that day, and so it was like this red clay mud all over everything. And some of the things one of the things that I remember happening at the building that night was something that had to be addressed. Public Enemy, who clearly was going to be our top tag team at that point, leading the first surge of ECW. Excuse me. And they would go out. They just wrestled two local guys down there, and it didn't matter if they were wrestling Hulk Hogan and Ric Flair or Joe Blow and Jack Blatt. They would have the same match. They'd fight all over the building. They'd get color. They would do this and they would do that. And I remember me and Taz and Paul pulling them aside after working with those local guys down there. They went out, and in their head they were trying to have a good match, but they didn't realize the difference of as a commodity and an entity for a company. You can't just go out and have the same match that you would with two superstars, and they weren't getting it quite at that point. It took them a while to get over that. But I remember Mick Foley and I talking about this, and to me was what was clearly wrong with the dirt sheets was they had their dolls, their favorites, and the other ones. I couldn't get a decent rating on that thing if I tried. Public Enemy, no matter who they wrestled, got 4 or 5 stars every time, every week. 5 stars, 5 or 4 stars, whatever the top of it is. But the Public Enemy were clearly the darlings of the sheets. And I remember Tommy used to get so pissed off at Bruce Mitchell because Bruce Mitchell used to constantly bury Tommy. And then when Tommy finally met him, he was thinking it was like some Studley writer someplace, and he meets Bruce Mitchell and he realizes, that he's, not Tom Cruise on the other end of the typewriter. Had he just brought his WCW or UWF persona there, I don't think it would have worked. But when he brought it there, he mixed in a little bit of the the hood with it. Like speaking from the black perspective, and not militant and not not hood. It was just that black perspective, and you don't have a right to playing himself off, and he and Scorpio started teaming a lot after that, playing themselves off as like the common. They were the common guy. Like when I worked with Ron, you certainly don't represent anybody. You're an ass. But we represent the common people like that come to the arena and stuff like that. They never try to play it off as like, the vernacular or, the hoodies or anything like that. But Ron started playing more towards that character. And it was the first time I'd ever seen him work something other than just a former football player. And then you would later see him in WWF when he went into, the different incarnations of the characters up there.
The Nation of Domination, which was
sure
very much like what you're talking about. Yeah. But now he doesn't last too long. Do you know what the circumstances are?
I think it was just that he had the opportunity to go to New York. Yeah. What we started realizing very quickly was that regardless of whether it was a swerve or them playing their part, that the ECW fans, I don't want to say were easy to work, but because they were always trying to play Booker and thinking they had outguessed us. And they were a very smart crowd. I mean, you stop and think about, what those fans had seen over the previous year in that building. It was a university level experience to professional wrestling. But those fans had, because of that, because they thought they were so in tune with what we were doing, it was easy to swerve them, because it was easy to feel the pulse. I know, like when we went to Allentown, he made it a point to mention that, hey, this is where they used to do their tapings. So I don't think he picked any building because of that, but he liked to point out the fact that, hey, this is where these guys used to work, and they made their, all these iconic TV shows that we grew up watching, and now here we are in these same buildings. So, it wasn't lost on me because I had grown up watching that wrestling, as most of the guys in our dressing room did. So when I'm suddenly finding myself in the dressing room in the building that Snuka got hit in the head with a coconut by Piper on, where the first Piper's Pit was done, and all these things that as a kid growing up and being mesmerized on Saturday night at midnight on television, and now here I am putting my boots on and getting ready to go out in the main event in the same building, was not lost on me.
Is this because of the heat between Cornette and Paul? Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. Paul and it's funny because when you meet these guys and you know them over the years like I do, I don't want to say they're twins of each other or mirror images, but they are all cut from the same cloth. They are all so identical, the same person. If you put them behind a curtain and pixeled their faces and disguised their voices over with the same tone, you'd have no idea which one was Cornette, which one was Heyman, which one was, it's hilarious. And that when you sit down and talk to one, they'll beat your ear for 3 hours about how much the other one's an asshole. And you go back over the other one and the other one, like, that motherfucker's an asshole. They are crazy, imbecilic in some respects and genius in other respects, cut from the exact same piece of cloth.
The accents are different, but yeah.
Yeah, Scarsdale and Louisville aren't too close together. total swerve. The people in the building had been because I guess he'd been, like had been playing up around town and stuff, that, was being driven to the doctor's office and, had the wraps on and everything else. So kudos to Hack that he was prescient enough to play it like that, because I doubt that it would have gotten that response. But that was the first big, where the entire crowd was like, holy fuck, where of ones that would come later. There was that night. There was a night that Gary got thrown down. These fans that are so smart, had seen so much stuff, yet were such willing victims, to the swerve. To me, the ECW fans in that building should never have been caught off by any wrestling angle, because they had seen everything. They knew Paul's thinking. They knew that when they went left, we were going right, and they had an understanding of all that, because they really were the sixth man on the bench, and yet they were willing participants to swallow the Kool-Aid each and every time it was provided to them, but that again is what makes, to me, ECW so special. When you see in 1994, when Vince is doing the ultra cartoon character and WCW is putting out their drivel, and then you see this show come that says, bring all your pessimism with you. You want to record it and stop, freeze frame it and watch and see, and all of that, and yet the fans still continue to buy into that, is precisely the reason it worked. Bring all that pessimism with you. You hate wrestling? Good. Come and check this out. And the angles all played out perfectly, not because Paul wrote the greatest storyline or that we played out the best way or whatever. It was the combination of all of it together. The fans believing that they were as smart as we were, or smarter, that Paul had written a pretty damn good storyline, that we played out a pretty good storyline, and that the action was just believable enough there in ECW that literally somebody might have gotten blinded. I mean, let's face it, we had people with broken necks later, and people set on fire and bleeding, and everything else, broken bones. So why not somebody have gotten blinded? It's completely believable.
Was this for Sandman what the "Thank You, Sir, May I Have Another" was for Dreamer as far as their tenure?
Yeah, but in a different way, because that's what established Tommy as being that gutsy, balls to the wall, never surrender babyface. And to me, that's what showed for Sandman. It showed that there was that level of subterfuge and evil genius or whatever. That there was a little bit more to the character than just a bumbling drunk, cigarette fiend. And but yeah, they definitely elevated his career.
Of course, Paul would have to book a night, no matter how many weeks after the previous card was,
20 minutes
right?
later.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Other than running opposition, did Todd or Paul ever try to do any kind of sabotage to any of Dennis's shows?
Not that I ever saw. That they never came to me and said, "Hey, go drive by the building and see if you can get some of their fans." They never ever mentioned to me any kind of overt way of saying, "Okay, let's screw Corluzzo." I think they felt like we got him good enough in the first round, and then like when they would do these follow-up shows and stuff. As I recall, that show didn't draw that great that night, did it?
I don't have a number on it.
That. And so from that sense, I remember, we were always looking at it like, okay, well, we threw the first punch, we drew 1,100 tonight, he drew 250 or 3 or whatever it was, some semblance of the amount that we had drawn. So clearly we had won the battle and the war. But Paul, I'd never heard Paul or Todd come to me, and I never heard of them going to anybody else and saying, because that's the kind of thing we got around the dressing room, I think they felt that the first round was good enough.
You tag with Pillman on this show. Talk to me about Brian Pillman. Is the loose cannon thing... Sabu gave some instances where it would seem that it was clearly an appropriate moniker.
He told me at one point, after he did the little fling with Flair around that time, that Flair told him to make him to set himself apart from everybody. And that's where he started. That's where I first saw that loose cannon. Not that he called it that, but I started seeing that aberrant behavior. And then later became much worse. In the ECW arena, the night that Harry Boatswain got involved, and he jumped into Boatswain's arms and ran out of the building. We had the confrontation at ringside. The spot was set up that I would swing the chair at him, and he was supposed to grab a fan and pull the fan in front of him. So I was aware that there was something to be coming in front of him as I swing the chair. What he didn't tell me, and what was just an idiotic move on his part, was he had grabbed a 6-month-old baby and held the baby up in front. And now I'm gauging the chair shot to say, be from me to you away, to start slow the chair down here. And the baby now is right here. So I mean, I came within probably 6 inches of taking this baby, cutting him in half with the chair. I mean, I swung like hell. And that was not planned. I mean, for any fan that watched it, that was not a planned spot. And if you watch it back, you'll see my face go beet red immediately. And I remember afterwards, Paul was livid as well. I mean, it was that kind of stuff that I think that towards the end, at least in my experience with Brian was not using the best judgment in separating, like, where does the loose cannon stop and where does reality begin? Because you hold a baby up like that. I mean, we would have both ended up in prison for that.
Brian should have been hit legit with the chair, and then the parent that brought a 6-month-old to wrestling should have been hit with it right after that.
Yeah, I probably agree.
Talk to me about pile driving Sherry Martel that night. Do you have to pile drive a lady a little differently than man? What's the deal?
No, Sherry was tougher than a guy. I mean, one thing you didn't have to do with Sherry is cut any corners or take things easy with her. I didn't like doing it because to me it was like the end of, for me, having Sherry Martel with me was a means of comfort. I mean, I knew that I had somebody this experienced and this good out here with me. One of the biggest names in women's wrestling, and as a valet, I mean, the accolades are out the wazoo for her. So for me to have had to break that string between us that night, there was, aside from our friendship, that we had been friends for years prior to that, it was sort of a melancholy point, because now I'm thinking, like, damn, I don't have Sherry Martel out here with me anymore. That means I'm going to have to work my ass off a hell of a lot more to even come close to getting the same type of reaction. Sherry was, simply put, the most professional and amazing woman to work with. Tough, never complained, great head on her shoulders. And keep in mind that she had to do that at a time where it wasn't necessarily chic for a girl to be those things, whereas like today it's a lot cooler for, and a lot of times the girls get a lot more, have a lot more leeway than they did then. But Sherry was somehow able to walk between that, tough as a guy, sweet as a babe, smart, but still sort of a little bit, ditzy or whatever. I mean, she balanced all that stuff out amazingly well.
Were there actual negotiations to bring in Barr and Guerrero right at this time?
I believe there were. I know that Barr, I think they were talking separately. I think Guerrero started talking after that because of what happened. But I know that Art had been talking with Paul. Whether they had come to agreement or not prior to that, I'm not certain. But that there was plans for him to come in. My guess would have been because they were tagging at the time, and they were an amazing tag team, that Paul probably was talking, if not at the same point, probably very close together after that.
Do you remember the locker room learning about Barr's passing?
Yeah. I didn't know Art personally, so I mean, it wasn't that kind of like, oh my God, I can't believe it. It was more for me stunning because that was like one of the first young guys that I remember, like when David Von Erich died. 10 years before that in Japan, and there was like all the stories about the pills and the drugs and the family history and all that kind of stuff. So now here's Art Barr, who, you know, you're from all intents and purposes being told was, you know, a fairly straight guy, you know, a great worker, damn young. That was like, holy shit, you know, how this, you know, this guy's so young, how do you even dead from the wrestling business? And, you know, that's how it hit me. It caught my attention more than affected me. It was more like, holy shit, this is a young guy. And, you know, sadly since then we've had way more than we should have.
Was it intended for him to wrestle this many times in one night, or did something go wrong? Or
My guess is had to be something went wrong because, you know, for Tommy to have wrestled that many times, for anybody to have wrestled that many times in one night, would have seemed, I think, strange.
his final match is with you at the end of the night in,
Yeah.
a DQ. He beat you in a DQ. Do you take it easy on someone who's been out there 5 times already?
Tommy, honestly, and I'm not trying to intentionally put somebody over. Tommy never ever took anything. It wasn't like part of his makeup. It was not part of his DNA to say, "Hey, I've already worked 5 times or whatever. Let's take it a little bit easy now." I may have, slowed down some of the running spots or, not the high bumps or whatever. But and that would have even been, if I even thought of it. Tommy was a workhorse, and that's part of my guess is that's part around the time that Paul was trying to get that workhorse of ECW thing over. But it seems strange to have him out there 6 times. I don't recall that.
Well, in conclusion, after reliving a year, and probably more than that in your own mind, of ECW, I have a couple of wrap-up questions. How much does Paul owe you?
$144,410.
Not that you counted.
In somewhat sense.
What is ECW? Why are we still talking about ECW?
Well, I'll answer the last one first. I think the reason we're still talking about ECW is the business has taken an absurd nosedive away from what we remember as kids growing up. And not that ECW was a replicant of what we grew up watching, but I know, like for me, in 1992, minus ECW, I would have never watched a day of wrestling after 1992. I was so ultra sick of dead men coming out of graves and crazy lunatic dentists with bad teeth and 7-time PhD deans that were the smartest men in the world, and these just ridiculously inane, stupid, that my 5-year-old kid couldn't get into, let alone somebody with any level of intelligence. And if I was at 1992 and as a mark again, on a Friday night when WWF came with that style of wrestling, you'd have wrestling, you'd have the Titty Club, or you'd have the dance hall, the dance club downtown. I'd either be at the dance club or most likely the Titty Club. Damn sure I would not be at the WWF show. And millions of people had followed that same route. No pun intended, but there were millions and millions of male 18 to 34-year-old fans that had been disenfranchised from the business, had been so totally cut away from it. It was fake. It was corny. People were stomping their foot and missing by that much. They couldn't talk, and when you did talk, it had to be some corny line of like the dean, "I'm going to take you to school." Ugh, just horrible, inane stuff. And then here comes this company, cut the fucking music, and the girls getting bumped, and the blood and Sabu flying like a kite around the building, and Terry Funk, refusing to ever die, and I mean just this whole march of all the stuff that we had missed about the business, and then some stuff that we had never really expected from the business. I remember in the early days we were going out and doing the promos, it's a goddamn shoot. Webster's defines wrestling as a sport, and goddamn it, we're a sport. And as wrestling went, that was as close as it got to being real until shoot fighting came along. I think for those reasons, those are the most obvious reasons, but also it's something that caught the imagination. To those fans that were willing to come and spend their money For those first couple of years when we needed them, we relied on them as the lifeline of ECW. They were there to play their part every third and a half week to help us survive another 2 or 3 weeks. And in response, we went out and gave them what we had. But there was something that captured the imagination that had been missing from wrestling before that. It looked different, it sounded different, it felt different, it tasted different. I mean, when you turned that show on, everything about it looked different than your daddy's wrestling. And that captured the imagination of the people. That's a testament to Paul, Todd, Funk, and me, and all the other guys in the dressing room, to the girls, but also to the fans, because the fans would play their part. You know, if you turn and jaw jack somebody in the crowd, yeah, the one or two guy here or there would like get a little bit too into it, but you know, hat guy at ringside knew exactly what his role was to be, and he made sure he played to that. Then we also had a supporting crew of people that were, you know, giving us the free assist. I mean, you know, we had people that were giving us all kinds of support, getting us back and forth from the airport, getting the rooms set up for us, making sure there was beer for the guys in the hotel rooms and back at the buildings, and taking the tickets and cleaning the buildings up afterwards. And this litany and scores of things that were done that they never get any kind of accolade for, they never got any pat on the back. ECW was, in my almost 30 years now in the business, the truest sense of a family, not just in the dressing room, but between us and the fans, us and those people I just mentioned that, you know, worked on all the behind the scenes stuff for us. It really was, you know, everybody working and pushing in the same direction or pulling in the same direction. And I think the reason that people are still talking about it today is, you know, wrestling has gone so far to the other extreme. To me, it's right back where it was in 1992, if not exponentially worse, which then begs the question of, when does the next ECW come out of it? What's next? I don't think you can capture that lightning in a bottle twice.